Winning Blueprint presents.
In the Lab Room, Philadelphia Eagles.
Yes. The Philadelphia Eagles. When is the last time you can remember the Eagles picking this high in the draft? In 2013, in the 2013 draft, they're going to be the number 4 overall selection. Just seems odd the Eagles picking in the top 20. The Eagles team is normally a playoff football team. And if they're not, they're usually on the outside looking in barely. So we're talking about a team that's constantly in the teens somewhere, if not in the 20s. They're number 4, which means they've had a pretty bad season or they swap picks with someone. And it's not the latter. It's the former. They were pretty bad this season. 4-12 gets you the 4th pick in the draft. And that's what the Philadelphia Eagles were this season. And a lot of that had to do with turnovers. The first thing you think of when you think of the 2012 Philadelphia Eagles. Turnovers. A minus 24 turnover differential will get you every time. You won't find teams in the league. And I'm telling you, there is a 99.9% chance that if you have a turnover ratio or differential that is negative 10 or more, you're probably not going to be a good football team. We're talking 6-10 or worse. You will rarely find a team that has a turnover differential in double digits negatively that makes it to the postseason or is any good at all. Because you can't turn a football over consistently in the National Football League and think you're going to win games. It just doesn't work that way. It's not set up in this league for you to succeed when you turn the football over. And the Eagles had their fair share of turnover woes this season. Even when Michael Vick was at the helm, that's probably when the problem was its most egregious. When Michael Vick was the quarterback, there was fumbles, there were interceptions being thrown. They couldn't get out of their own way. Games that they should have won early on in the season, they lost because they couldn't stop turning the football over. So it's pretty safe to say, and I feel like there are a few assumptions that we can make about this Eagles team moving forward. Now, you know what happens when you assume. So I don't like to assume very often. But I feel pretty safe and secure in saying that I don't think Michael Vick is going to be the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles moving forward. Now, I'm not 100% sure about that. Remember, keep in mind the Eagles don't have a head coach right now. So the next guy that comes in might be very fond of Michael Vick. In fact, might think that Michael Vick is a guy that he can win with. So then, Michael Vick might be a guy that returns again. Who knows? But I'm pretty sure that the Eagles are going to move on with the Nicholas Foles experiment. Now, I feel pretty safe in saying that. I feel like that's something that we can assume. I also feel pretty safe in assuming that the Eagles grossly overpaid for Nnamdi Asomugha's services. Don't you agree? We can all sit here and say that they paid too much money to a guy that's past his prime. And they're stuck with that contract. They shedded Jason Babin during the season last year. They felt like, hey, we're overpaying this guy. Let's get rid of him now. Nnamdi is in that same boat. I feel like they're overpaying for a guy that you're going to get marginal performances out of at best moving forward. The best of Nnamdi Asomugha was in Oakland. You got the leftovers in Philadelphia, and you grossly overpaid for it. So the Eagles have issues on their hands. But they were 4-12 because they turned the football over. Make no mistake about it. And they just had too many messes to clean up in this season. You had the turnover issue to clean up. You had Michael Vick not being able to stay healthy as an issue that you had to clean up. And then you had the defensive coordinator issue that was a problem. And we talked about this in the lab reports before the season started. Everyone assumed, here we go assuming again, that Juan Castillo was going to be fired immediately after the season was over. What did Andy Reid do? He retained his services. And no one could really understand why this was being done. When you are a big man, when you are someone that gets it, you admit your faults, you admit your mistakes, and you move on. You admit that you made a mistake, you correct it, and you move on. That's what people who get it, that's what people who don't have huge egos do. They can put their ego, and look, you may have a huge ego, but you can put it aside for a second and realize, I made a mistake here. And I need to correct my mistake before it becomes an even bigger mistake. Andy Reid failed to do that. He allowed his ego to get in the way because he really so badly wanted to point his finger at people and say, I told you so. I told you I could take an offensive line coach and make him a defensive coordinator. You guys laughed at me. You said that I didn't know what I was doing. You said that I didn't know what I was talking about. You said Juan Castillo would never make it as a defensive coordinator. Look at me now. He was wrong. He was very wrong. And I think that it cost his team dearly in this season. Because it wasn't the fact that he retained the services of Juan Castillo that was the problem. I don't think that that was the problem at all. In fact, I thought that getting rid of him in the middle of the season was an even bigger issue, if you want to ask me, in my opinion. I thought that that was an even bigger issue that they let him go in the middle of the season when the defense really wasn't the problem. The offense was in terms of turning the football over. Yeah, the defense wasn't great, but they weren't the cause of you losing games. And I thought that the Eagles' defense got progressively worse as the season wore on because they made that change in the middle of the season, which I thought was meritless. It didn't make any sense. That move had no legs to stand on. Making the change in the middle of the season doesn't solve problems immediately. It only causes more. Because you take a guy and you shift him up, and now things are being shifted around, and he has intimate knowledge of one position. So you take, and I don't remember exactly what Todd Bowles was. I don't know if he was the linebacker coach. I know he wasn't the D-line coach. That was Jim Washburn. So I'm not sure if he was the linebackers coach, the DB's coach, whatever he was. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you took a guy from a position and made him in control of the whole defense. And that's hard to do in 2 weeks. That's hard to do, period. Let alone having 2 weeks to really prepare and being thrusted into that position. And I thought that Todd Bowles handled it the best way he could. But he was overmatched, though. And I thought that Andy Reid really put the defense in a compromising position. He put Todd Bowles in a compromising position. And he even said it himself. He set Juan Castillo up for failure. He put him in a compromising position. And he felt like he needed to end that. I get it. But you should have did that at the end of last season, not in the middle of this season. And so the Eagles just had too many issues. They weren't a good team because they just had too many things other than football. And don't forget Andy Reid's son passing away. They just had too many things going on during the course of this season to be a good football team. You can't have that many distractions and think you're going to win and turn the football over. It just doesn't work that way in the National Football League. So the Eagles ended up being 4-12. Andy Reid is out as head coach. I just think he overstayed his welcome. You know, he was just in Philadelphia way too long. That's all it boils down to. After a while, you overstay your welcome. You just stay too long sometimes. And this isn't the 70s. Guys aren't coaches for 22 years, 25 years. Guys aren't the face of a franchise for 2 decades anymore. There are no more Chuck Knowles. There are no more Tom Landrys. Those guys don't exist anymore. Where he's just in place for 25 years. And he's a fixture for that franchise. Bill Cowher, Jeff Fisher, and guys like that were the last of a dying breed. They don't make them like that anymore. And even those guys only stayed 14 or 16 years. They didn't stay 20 years. And so you knew Andy Reid was on borrowed time. He had been with the Eagles since about 99 or so, 98, somewhere around there. I know him and Donovan McNabb came in at the same time, and I think that was around 99. So that would put him right around 13 seasons. A long time to be with one franchise. After a while, your voice falls on deaf ears. Guys stop listening. They start tuning you out. They hear the same message. It doesn't get across to them. The talent changes. This is a very talented team, though. But after a while, it becomes harder and harder to coach the same team. It just does. It's human nature. And so it was time for him to move on. So now they got to find a new coach. Who will that be? We don't know. I just think that the Eagles need a veteran head coach. And a lot of names are floating around out there, but no one's really sure who the Eagles will hire as their next head coach. All I know is it needs to be someone with experience. Lovie Smith, Ken Wisenhunt. You can throw Bruce Arians in there if you like. John Gruden. All those names come to mind when I think of guys that they need to consider hiring. Guys that they should be interviewing to see if they want to make them their head coach. But it needs to be a guy that can say, look, I've been to a Super Bowl before. John Gruden can say that. He's actually won. Ken Wisenhunt can say that. Lovie Smith can say that. And these are all guys that you can put in front of your team, put in front of a group of veterans and say, look, this guy's gotten it done in the league before. You need to listen to him because he's been to the top of the mountain. Now, he didn't conquer the mountain in some instances, but he's been to the top of the mountain. And a lot of you guys haven't been there, so you need to be quiet, listen to what this guy has to say, follow his direction. He'll take you places. Can't say that with a young upstart 39-year-old offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator or special teams coach. Can't say that. So you need to find a guy that fits your locker room. And if you're the Eagles, you have a veteran-laden locker room. You need to find a coach that suits that locker room. It's funny because if you look at the Eagles and you look at their statistics from the 2012 season, you'd be amazed. If you looked at everything except the turnover ratio and the turnover differential, you look at everything except that, this is a 4-12 team? We're talking about the same team, right? 4-12? It's a 4-12 franchise? I would have never guessed. Then when you remove your hand from that turnover differential, then you say, oh, okay. All right. Now I get it. Now I see why they were a 4-12 team. Because that's the difference between being a playoff team and a 4-12 team. Turning the football over. Taking care of it or the lack thereof. And for the Eagles, you look at their stats up and down. They're neck and neck with their opponents. Or they're better. They had a good season running the football. Wasn't great, but they had a very solid season running the football. They had a good season throwing the football. Wasn't great. A lot of turnovers. Again, that's where a lot of the turnovers came from. But you look at their numbers, and they're right there. Passing yards, rushing yards, yards per attempt. They're all right there. Now, they didn't score a lot of touchdowns. You don't score a lot of touchdowns when you turn the football. That's just part of the game. You can have a 7-play, 72-yard drive end with a turnover. You don't get points. You don't get a touchdown. But you get the yards. You get the time of possession. You just don't get the points. And that's the most important thing. Teams will let you drive 20-20 all you like. But if you got to settle for a field goal or you're going to turn it over, they could care less. Have all the yards you like. You could have 600 yards in a game. But if you only score 17 points, you're probably going to lose that game. Teams will let you go up and down the field if it's not going to yield points. And the Eagles, for them this season, statistically, they were fine. They went up and down the field. They just didn't score points because they were turning the football over. They were turning the football over. We know this Eagles team is a very explosive team. But their highest output this season was 30 points at Dallas. That came in like week 14. That goes to show you how inept this team was at scoring points. And a large reason was because we go back to the same point, the first point that we made, the turnovers. And so this is a very talented team. There's talent all over this roster. I like Brandon Graham. He came on at the end of the season. That's why they got rid of Jason Babbitt. Because Brandon Graham was waiting in the wings, and they felt like they were overpaying for Jason Babbitt's services. And Brandon Graham was right there ready to play. So they cut him loose. And Brandon Graham delivered once he got in the game. There's talent on this team. And so the Eagles have areas of need. They need a safety. They need safeties in the worst way. I feel like their safeties are maybe their worst position on their team. They don't have good safety play. They could use some more corners. They drafted Brandon Boykin last year out of Georgia. He's a slot guy, though. They need another corner out wide because Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie and Nnamdi Asomugha, Those guys, you're thinking that they're a lot better than when they are, but sometimes DRC and Nomney just aren't getting it done. And so maybe you have to consider moving on. I don't know. There's money tied up in Nomney. DRC is probably going to be looking for a new contract here shortly. So I don't know. I just don't know what you do if you're the Eagles. That secondary to me is the weakest part of their team. And 2 years ago, it was the linebackers. 2 years ago, they couldn't stop anyone because their linebackers were horrendous. Well, now it's the secondary, if you ask me. I think the linebackers are slowly coming along. D'Amico Ryans kind of helped shore that group up a little bit. But the secondary is where their struggles really are made apparent. You see the Eagles, and they're giving it up in the passing game consistently. And so whoever comes in as the new head coach, he's going to have to come in. And really, to me, if you get a defensive-minded coach, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world because you got to be able to get this defense in order. This defense, to me, is the reason why the Eagles aren't winning consistently. The offense, there's Macklin, there's Jackson, there's Shady McCoy. There's explosion on this offense. There's a lot of guys that can score like that on offense. That's not the problem. The problem is defensively, they can't stop anybody. They can't stop teams from scoring 31, scoring 33 consistently. And that's where your problem lies, and that's where the Eagles need to really focus their attention in this draft and in free agency moving forward. They got to figure out a way to make their defense better. Because offensively, they're going to get their left tackle back. He was gone for the whole season. That's going to put everyone else back in their proper slots. I think they were banged up along that offensive line. I mean, their offensive line looked like a missing persons unit. Just so many guys that you've never seen before. And you ask yourself, hey, whatever happened to that guy? Oh, he's hurt. Whatever happened to that guy? Yeah, he's hurt. What happened to that guy? Yeah, he's hurt. And so you got guys all along that line shuffled up, and it really messed up the continuity of their offensive line. So I don't think the line is in that dire of straits because you're going to get those guys back. On offense, the quarterback is what you need to focus on. Is Nick Foles the guy? Is Michael Vick going to be retained? Who knows? Figure that out. You've got weapons out wide. You've got Shady McCoy, one of the most dangerous and explosive backs in the National Football League, in the backfield. Bryce Brown asserted himself well as a guy that can come in as change of pace. He has to stop fumbling, but they can work on him with that. You can teach someone to stop fumbling, but you can't teach what he has. Speed and the ability to play in the National Football League. And so they have a bright backfield. Out wide, I've already stressed how good they are out there. Brent Selleck is playing solid tight end. Clay Harbor is a solid backup tight end. They've got pieces on offense. Defensively, they need to get their act together. There's not a lot after Trent Cole, Brandon Graham, D'Amico Ryans. There's not a lot after that. You know, Fletcher Cox, they drafted him. I thought he was impressive at times this season. The Eagles stay with a nice rotation on the defensive line. That's not the issue. From the linebackers back is where you need to start addressing needs. And I think that's what they need to focus on in this draft if you're the Eagles and in free agency as well. And that's going to do it for the Philadelphia Eagles. They've got a lot of talent. They need a head coach. They need to figure out who's going to be their quarterback. And then they need to start plugging in holes, fixing up that defense, and moving on from there. And I think that these are one of those teams that could go from worst to first in an instant. So if you're an Eagles hater, much like myself, enjoy this season because it might not last that long. The Eagles might be right back in a prominent position in the NFC East in a very short time, possibly next season, depending on who comes in and what they decide to do at the quarterback position and how they have this team playing football in the next season. And so we'll see. But that'll do it for the Eagles for their lab follow-up. The next team on the docket will be the Detroit Lions. And they struggled this year after making the postseason in 2011. They had a very disappointing 2012 campaign. And so we'll talk Detroit Lions football on Friday on this program in the Lab Room Lab Follow-Up. So I thank you for joining me. Want to see you back here tomorrow. Have a good one.
Philadelphia Eagles.